I will start my reading practice from the book Magic Words. But beyond slang and terminology, there are other ways organizations or industries use language differently. Some may tend to use shorter, more clipped sentences, while others may use longer ones. Some may use more concrete language, while others may talk more abstractly. To study the link between language and success at work, a team of scientists looked at a data source we don't usually think much about: email. Unlike rate beer users, employees don't write online reviews, but they do write emails, lots of them. Emails asking colleagues for information, and emails providing feedback on others' work. Emails sharing drafts of presentations, and emails scheduling a time to meet with a client. Thousands of notes about every topic imaginable. Just for fun, take a minute, open your sent items folder and scan what's inside. It might seem like normal work and personal stuff, trivial even, and it often is. But it's not just any work and personal stuff, it's your work and personal stuff. These notes about the headers on a particular document or what image should go on page 23 of a PowerPoint deck might seem insignificant, but they provide a snapshot of what's going on in your work life. Not only the progression of various projects and decisions, but how you have evolved as a colleague, leader, and potentially even friend. They are pottery shards or remnants of that ancient civilization that is you at the office, and consequently, they provide a lot of information about you and how you are or have not changed over time. The scientists looked at 5 years of data, more than 10 million emails sent between hundreds of employees of a mid-sized firm. Everything Susan in accounting sent to Tim in HR, and everything Lucinda in sales sent to James in R&D. And rather than looking at how many emails were sent or who the emails were sent to, the researchers looked at the words each employee used. But this is where the study gets even more interesting, because rather than focusing on the content of what employees talked about, example document headers or PowerPoint slides, the researchers zeroed in on something completely different: employees' linguistic style. When reading an email, talking on the phone, or consider any type of communication, we tend to focus on its content. Take this chapter. If asked to reflect on the language, you would probably think about the subject matter or topic being discussed. The chapter started out talking about an online beer rating community, for example, before moving into a discussion of email language. The same can be said for email. If someone asked you to look at your email and report back on the language used, you would probably focus on the main topics. There were a bunch of emails about this meeting, others about a particular project, and a few regarding that big retirement party you have been planning for a coworker. All these are examples of content, the subject matter, topic, or substance of what was being discussed. But while content is clearly important, that's another dimension that often goes unnoticed: linguistic style. Consider the phrase they said to follow up in a couple of weeks. The content following up in a couple of weeks provides a sense of what is happening, but embedded within the content are words like they, to, a. These pronouns, articles, and other styles words often fade into the background. We often don't even notice that they are there. In fact, even after I mentioned them, you probably had to look closely to find them in the sentences. They are almost invisible. People gloss over them as they jump between the nouns, verbs, and adjectives that make up the linguistic content of what was said. But while they are often ignored, style words actually provides a lot of information. Communicators have only so much flexibility in the content they are communicating. If someone asks when a client said to follow up and the answer is in a couple of weeks, some version of those words is probably needed to communicate the idea. But how we communicate that idea is up to us. We could say they said to follow up in a couple of weeks. Following up a couple weeks from now would be good, or any number of variations. And while these differences might seem minor because they reflect how people communicate, they provide insight into the communicators themselves. Everything from personality and preferences to how smart people are and whether they are lying. The researchers analyzed employees' linguistic style, in particular, how similar people's linguistic style was to that of their co-workers, or said another way, their cultural fit. Whether employees used language the same way as others around them, whether someone used personal pronouns, example we or I, when communicating with colleagues who used them a lot, or used articles, example a or the, and prepositions, example in or to similar degree as their peers. The results were remarkable. Similarity shaped success. Employees whose linguistic style was more similar to their co-workers were 3 times more likely to be promoted. They received better performance evaluations and higher bonuses. In some ways, this is great news. If you fit in well at your new job, you are likely to do well. But what about everybody else? What happens to people who don't fit in? Indeed, people with a dissimilar linguistic style were not so fortunate. They were 4 times more likely to be fired. So, are people who don't fit in from the get go just destined to fail? Not quite. Because rather than just studying whether employees fit in initially, the researchers also examined how their fit changed over time, whether some employees were more adaptable than others. Similar to the beer community, most new hires adapted quickly. After a year at the firm, they had acclimated to the organization's linguistic norms. Not everyone, however, adapted to the same degree. Some adapted more quickly while others adapted more slowly. Adaptability in turn helped explain success. While successful employees adapted, those who would eventually be fired never did. They started with low cultural fit and slowly declined from there. Linguistic similarity even helped distinguish between employees who stayed at the firm and those who left to pursue better options. Not because they got fired, but because they were offered something better elsewhere. These folks assimilated early on, but at some point their language started to diverge. While clearly capable of adapting, eventually they stopped trying, foreshadowing their intention to quit. Adaptability ended up being more important than initial fit. People who were a good fit initially did do well, but those who adapted quickly to the changing norms were even more successful. Fit is not something we have to be born with. We just have to be willing to adapt over time. The email study highlights the benefits of fitting in. Using similar language can lead to better performance evaluations, higher bonuses, and a great likelihood of being promoted. And similarities benefits go far beyond just life at the office. Daters who talk similarity are more likely to go on a second date. Students who write similarity are more likely to become friends, and couples who use languages more similarly are more likely to be dating 3 months later. Using similar language can facilitate conversation, make people feel connected, and increase their perception that they are part of the same tribe, all of which can increase liking, trust, and a variety of positive downstream outcomes. But is fitting in always a good thing, or might there be situations where differences is better? I found out I had to get into the music business. Drive difference. On a cold fall afternoon, Montero Hill was making music when he always made music in his bedroom. Well, in the closet of his bedroom or in the closet of his grandma's house, whichever was quieter at that time. Like many aspiring musicians, the unemployed 19-year-old college dropout was trying different things, trying to make a hit. He was pushing his music through the internet full time, posting songs on SoundCloud and struggling to get traction. On Halloween, he was scrolling through YouTube looking for beats when he found something that spoke to him. A reworked sample of a 9 Inch Nails track made by an aspiring producer in the Netherlands who also made music in his bedroom. Montero bought the beat for $30, put down some lyrics, and released a song a few weeks later. The likelihood that any particular song will become a hit is extremely low, and for new artists or those without a record deal that encourages radio airplay, the likelihood is even lower. There are hundreds of millions of songs on SoundCloud, and hundreds of thousands are added each day. Few are played more than a handful of times, and among those, more most are hits by artists who already have a large following. But this song was different, and this song broke the internet. Montero's, or he as he is now known, Lee Axis, Old Town Road has been streamed billions of times. It sold more than 10 million units and made Billboard history, spending 19 straight weeks at the top of the charts. It also made Lil Nas X a household name, leading him to be named one of Time magazine's most influential people on the internet. Not bad for a kid making music in his bedroom. But what made Old Town Road so successful, and might its success say something deeper about why things catch on? Industry executives, cultural critics, and consumers alike have long wondered why some songs succeed while others fail. Some tracks get millions of streams while others barely get listened to. For every old town road that burns up the charts, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of songs that never get traction. One possibility is that success is random, that it is luck or chance that a particular song ends up making it. Indeed, even so called experts are pretty poor at separating the wheat from the chaff. Elvis was told he should go back to driving trucks. The Beatles were told guitar groups were on their way out. Lady Gaga was told her music was too dance oriented to be marketable. Even if some logic exists behind how hits happen, that deeper truth often seems impossible to discern. To see if there might be something more systematic going on, through a few years ago, Grant Packard and I started exploring what makes a hit. Every song is different, but we wondered whether successful songs might have something in common, specifically whether they might tend to be similar to or different from other songs in their genre. And to measure similarity, we examined the themes each song covered. For certain songs, the main themes are easy to see. Diana Ross and Lionel Richie's Endless Love is clearly a love song. Not only is love in the title, but it starts with the phrase my love. The third line has love in it, and the word love appears 12 more times throughout the song. The same goes the same goes for the songs like Rihanna's We Found Love, Boy's Second Man's I Will Make Love to You, and Celine Dion's Because You Loved Me. Their titles and lyrics make it easy to classify them as love songs, and indeed, they are often listed among the better or most popular love songs of all time. But other songs are tougher to classify. Natalie Imbruglia's Torn, for example, is about love and the emotional challenges of a tough breakup. But look for the word love in the song and you won't find it. That word doesn't appear in the title or any of the lyrics. The same goes for other love songs such as Peter, Paul, and Mary's Living on a Jet Plane and No Doubts Don't Speak. Further, while some songs are clearly about love, it's not obvious that all love songs are truly that similar. Elvis Presley's Can't Help Falling in Love and Carrie Underwood's Before He Cheats both touched on love, but they are clearly not the same. Some love songs, example Katrina and the Waves Walking on Sunshine, are about happy positive love. Some, that is Rick Springfield's Jesse's Girl, are about unrequited love, and some, that is Alanis Morissette's You Oughta Know, are about anger toward an ex. Saying that these songs are about the same thing would be like saying that chocolate cake and crab cakes are the same. Sure, they both include the word cake, but they are pretty different. Outside of love songs, things get even tougher. What is the Beatles' Hey Jude about? or Prince's When Doves Cry? Different people tend to have very different answers. Some people think that Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA is about patriotism and American pride, for example, but it's actually about how shamefully the United States treated Vietnamese war veterans. All this is to say that people's perceptions may not be the most reliable indicator of the main theme of a song. So rather than have people do it, we ask the computer to help. Thank you. That's it for the day.